Most people think the loudest sound in the world is a gunshot. They are wrong. The loudest sound in the world is the silence of your wife watching you die and doing absolutely nothing to stop it. I did not hear a scream. I did not hear a siren. I only heard the terrifying, quiet click of a text message being sent while I bled out in the dirt. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. It was the kind of Sunday afternoon that sells real estate. The sky was a piercing, impossible blue, and the air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. I was on my knees on the back deck, a power drill in my hand, trying to fix a loose plank that had been annoying Morgan for weeks. Morgan. Just thinking her name made me smile back then. She was in the kitchen, barely 10 feet away through the sliding glass door. I could see her silhouette moving around the island. She was making iced tea. We were supposed to have a barbecue later with some neighbors. I was 42 years old. I was retired. I was happy. For 15 years, I existed in the shadows. I worked in places that do not exist on maps, doing things that governments deny, for people who never say thank you. My life was calculated risk, high-velocity lead, and silence. When I met Morgan, I laid all that down. I buried Victor the specialist deep in the ground and became Victor the husband. I traded my rifle for a socket wrench and my paranoia for peace. I truly believed the war was over. I adjusted the knee pad on my right leg and leaned forward to drive the screw into the wood. The birds were singing. The wind chimed gently against the eaves. Whip. The sound was small. To a civilian, it might have sounded like a heavy branch snapping or a rock hitting the fence. But my brain did not process it as a branch. My brain bypassed my conscious thought and went straight to the primitive, lizard part of my mind that I thought was dormant. It was the distinct, dry cough of a suppressed firearm. A split second later, the air next to my ear exploded. It felt like a hot iron rod had been whipped across the side of my head. The impact threw my equilibrium off, and the wood of the deck splintered into my face. I did not think. I did not pause to ask, what was that? I dropped. Gravity was my best friend. I went limp, letting my body collapse flat against the decking, rolling instantly to the left, off the elevated platform and down into the crawl space beneath the deck. Another shot chewed up the wood exactly where my head had been a fraction of a second ago. Whip. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my breathing remained steady. It was automatic. The husband was gone. The specialist was back online. I pressed my hand to the side of my head. It came away slick and bright red. The bullet had grazed the cartilage of my ear, taking a chunk of skin but leaving the skull intact. 2 inches to the right, and I would be dead. I lay in the dirt, smelling the damp earth and the mold under the house. The adrenaline slowed time down. I scanned the trajectory. The shots came from the tree line, about 100 yards back. High angle. Maybe a tree stand. I waited for the scream. That was the next logical step. Morgan was 10 feet away. The glass door was open. She must have heard the impact. She must have seen me fall. I waited for her voice, that high-pitched panic, the sound of her running to me, the sound of her dialing 911. Silence. The birds had stopped singing. The wind chimes were still, but there was no scream. I crawled on my elbows, low crawling through the dirt like I was back in the jungle, positioning myself behind the lattice skirting of the deck. I had a clear line of sight through the diamond-shaped holes. I could see the sliding glass door. I saw Morgan. She was standing right at the glass. She was not running. She was not reaching for the first aid kit. She was holding a glass of iced tea in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked at the spot on the deck where my blood was splattered. She looked at the splintered wood. Then, she looked out toward the tree line. She did not look scared. She looked annoyed. My blood ran colder than the dirt I was lying in. This hurt more than the bullet. This was a different kind of wound, one that tears your soul apart instead of your flesh. I watched the woman I had slept next to for 6 years, the woman I promised to protect with my life, lift her phone. She tapped the screen. Once. Twice. Then she brought the phone to her ear. I held my breath, straining to hear. The air was so still I could hear the ice clinking in her glass. "You missed," she said. Her voice was flat, cold. "I saw him roll. He is under the deck. Finish it, Ryder. Do it now before the neighbors hear." Ryder. The name meant nothing to me, but the tone meant everything. This was not a crime of passion. This was a contract. My wife had hired a hitman. I heard the crunch of heavy boots on dry leaves coming from the woods. The shooter was moving in. He was coming to check the kill. He was coming to put a confirmation round in my head because his employer, my wife, had ordered him to. I had no weapon. My gun safe was upstairs in the master bedroom. My hidden cash was in the garage. All I had was a power drill on the deck above me, which was now out of reach. I checked my watch. 2:14 p.m. I had maybe 30 seconds before Ryder crossed the lawn and flanked the deck. If I stayed here, I was a dead man. If I ran across the open lawn, I was a dead man. I looked at Morgan one last time. She took a sip of her tea, turning her back to the window, assuming I was already as good as dead. That image burned itself into my retinas. The casual indifference. The boredom. She was treating my murder like a chore that was taking too long. I felt something inside me break. It was the part of me that believed in love, in redemption, in normal life. It shattered into a million sharp pieces, and what was left was pure, cold rage. I scanned the crawl space. There was a loose panel on the north side, leading into the thick, overgrown bushes that lined the side of the house. It was a tight squeeze. I started to move. Silent. Fast. I heard the boots hit the grass of the lawn. He was running now, closing the distance. I slipped through the loose panel, the thorns of the rose bushes tearing at my clothes and face, masking the pain of my bleeding ear. I rolled into the drainage ditch that ran parallel to the property line. It was covered in tall weeds. I became part of the ground. I became a ghost. I heard the heavy footsteps stomp onto the wooden deck above. I heard the shooter stop. "He's not here," a male voice grunted. It sounded rough, like gravel in a blender. "Find him." Morgan's voice drifted from inside the house, sharp and angry. "He can't have gone far. He is hurt. Find him and put a bullet in his brain, Ryder, or you don't get the rest of the money." I was already moving down the ditch, creating distance, putting the house behind me. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging, mixing with the blood on my cheek. I wiped them away furiously. I was not crying because I was scared. I was crying because Victor the husband had just died on that deck. And the man crawling through the mud, plotting how to hunt down the woman he used to love. That was someone else entirely. I reached the end of the ditch and slipped into the dense forest that bordered our subdivision. I checked my pulse. 50 beats per minute. Calm. Lethal. I had 48 hours before they realized I wasn't just hiding. I was hunting. They thought they had missed a target. They had no idea they had just declared war on a nation of one. The woods were my first home long before I ever bought a house in the suburbs. I moved through the undergrowth with a fluidity that I had not used in nearly a decade. My boots found the silent patches of moss and avoided the dry twigs. Every step was calculated. My ear was a throbbing epicenter of heat, sending shockwaves of pain down my neck with every heartbeat. I could feel the warm, sticky trail of blood soaking into the collar of my flannel shirt. I did not stop until I was 3 miles deep into the state forest that bordered our property. There was a specific cluster of boulders near a dried-up creek bed. To a hiker, it looked like random geological debris. To me, it was insurance. 6 years ago, 2 weeks before our wedding, I had come out here at midnight with a shovel and a waterproof Pelican case. I told myself it was just paranoia, a remnant of a life I was leaving behind. I told myself I would never need to open it. I was wrong. I knelt in the dirt, ignoring the screaming protest of my knees, and dug. The earth was soft. Within minutes, I hit the hard plastic of the case. I pulled it free, wiped off the soil, and keyed in the combination. Click. The lid hissed as the pressure seal broke. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. A change of clothes, a burner phone, a solar charger, 3 stacks of cash. a Glock 19 with 3 spare magazines, and a ruggedized tablet. I stripped off my bloody shirt. The air was cooling as the afternoon sun began to dip, but the cold felt good against my skin. I opened the first aid kit stored in the lid. I used a bottle of water to wash the blood from the side of my head. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and sharp. Using the small mirror in the kit, I inspected the damage. The bullet had taken the top curve of my ear. It was ugly, but it would heal. I bit down on a piece of leather strap and poured alcohol over the wound. The burn was absolute. It cleared my head instantly. Then, I took the tube of medical-grade superglue and sealed the jagged skin shut. No stitches. No hospital records. No paper trail. I changed into a dark hoodie and black cargo pants. I holstered the Glock at the small of my back. The weight of the steel felt familiar. It felt like an old friend shaking my hand. I was no longer Victor the husband. I was a ghost. I sat on one of the boulders and powered up the tablet. It connected to a dedicated satellite uplink I paid for through a shell company in Panama. I opened the program I had installed in our house 5 years ago. Morgan knew about the Ring doorbell. She knew about the alarm system on the windows. She did not know about the pinhole cameras I had installed inside the smoke detectors, the air vents, and the decorative molding in the living room. I had told myself I did it for her safety. I wanted to be able to watch over her if I was ever away on a business trip. Now, I was using them to watch my own funeral. The screen flickered to life. The feed was crystal clear 4K video. Police lights flashed through the front window, painting the living room in strobing blue and red. 2 uniformed officers were standing in the middle of our Persian rug. Morgan was sitting on the sofa, clutching a tissue. I turned the volume up. "I don't know," Morgan sobbed. Her voice trembled perfectly. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "He was just fixing the deck." I heard a pop, like a firecracker. I looked out and, oh God, there was so much blood. She buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. "Did you see anyone, ma'am?" one of the officers asked gently. "No," she wailed. "I was too scared. I just ran to the bathroom and locked the door and called you." Did you find his body?" "We are still searching the woods, ma'am," the officer said. "There is a blood trail, but we haven't located your husband yet. We have K-9 units on the way." I watched her face. For a split second, behind the tissue, her eyes narrowed. She was calculating. She knew the blood trail ended at the creek where I had waded into the water to mask my scent. She knew they wouldn't find a body. "Please," she whispered. "Find him." I closed my eyes for a moment. The betrayal felt physical, like a punch to the gut. I remembered holding her on that sofa while we watched movies. I remembered planning our anniversary trip in that room. It was all a lie. Every smile, every touch, every "I love you" was just camouflage. The police stayed for another hour. They took statements. They dusted for prints on the deck. Finally, they left, promising to keep a patrol car outside. As soon as the front door closed and the latch clicked, the atmosphere in the house changed instantly. Morgan stood up. She walked to the window and watched the cruiser pull away. Then, she turned around. The tears vanished. Her posture straightened. She didn't look sad. She looked furious. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number. She put it on speaker and tossed it onto the coffee table while she poured herself a glass of wine. "Yeah." A voice crackled through the phone. It was the same gravelly voice I had heard in the woods. "Ryder, you are incompetent," Morgan hissed. Her voice was ice cold, dripping with venom. "One job, Ryder. One simple job." He was on his knees. He was a stationary target. He moved, Ryder growled. At the last second, I clipped him. "You didn't kill him," Morgan screamed, picking up a vase and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall. "He is out there. Do you know who he is? Do you have any idea what he is capable of? If he is alive, he isn't running. He is planning. Relax, babe. He's a contractor. He fixes houses. He's probably bleeding out in a ditch somewhere. He isn't just a contractor." Morgan paced the room like a caged tiger. "I told you there are gaps in his past. Things he doesn't talk about. If he survived, we are exposed." We need that insurance money, Ryder. We need it by next week or Julian is going to lose everything. Julian. I froze. My finger hovered over the tablet screen. Julian was my brother. My younger brother. The one I had put through college. The one I had given a job at my construction firm. The one I trusted with my accounts. The room spun. The forest around me seemed to tilt. It wasn't just my wife. It was my own blood. They were working together. I'll find him, Ryder said. I'm tracking the blood trail. If the cops don't find him, I will. I'll finish it tonight. You better, Morgan said, taking a long drink of wine. Because if he comes back here, if he walks through that door, neither of us is making it out alive. She hung up. I sat there in the darkening woods, the glow of the tablet illuminating my face. The pain in my ear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard numbness. They thought I was the prey. They thought I was a wounded animal hiding in a hole. Morgan was right about one thing. I wasn't running. I looked at the image of my wife finishing her wine in the house I paid for. I looked at the shattered vase on the floor. I reached into the Pelican case and pulled out a small, black device, a distinct frequency jammer. Then, I pulled out a map of the local area. You're right, Morgan, I whispered to the screen. I am not just a contractor. I packed the gear. I covered the hole. I moved out into the night. The hunt had begun. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I moved along the perimeter of the forest, paralleling the main road, but staying deep enough in the tree line to remain invisible to passing cars. My target wasn't home. Not yet. First, I needed intel. I needed to know exactly who Ryder was, where he slept, and how deep this route went. I made my way to an abandoned lumber yard about 5 miles north of my house. It was a relic of the town's industrial past, rusted corrugated metal and rotting wood. But for me, it was a sanctuary. I climbed to the top of the old water tower. It gave me a 360-degree view of the valley and, more importantly, isolation. I sat on the metal catwalk, legs dangling over the edge, and opened the ruggedized tablet again. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was the part of the job most people didn't understand. Warfare isn't just about bullets, it's about information. Before you pull a trigger, you have to know where the bullet needs to go. I accessed the back door to my company's server. I had built the firewall myself, leaving a small, undetectable vulnerability that only I knew about. A key under the mat for digital emergencies. I went straight to the payroll and expense accounts. Julian managed these. I trusted him implicitly. I never double-checked his work because he was family. That was my mistake. In my world, trust is a liability. I pulled up the ledger for the last 6 months. At first glance, it looked clean. Standard material costs, subcontractor payments, labor fees. But the devil is in the details. I ran a search for the shell company I had seen briefly on a bank statement Morgan had left on the counter weeks ago, Onyx Logistics. There it was. Every Friday for the last 4 months, a transfer of $4,500 was made to Onyx Logistics. The description was always vague: site prep, debris removal, consulting. I traced the routing number. It didn't go to a logistics firm. It bounced through 2 regional banks before landing in a personal account at a credit union in the next county. The account holder's name, Ryder Kane. I pulled his background check. It was a laundry list of violence: aggravated assault, armed robbery, dishonorable discharge from the Marines for conduct unbecoming. He wasn't a professional hitman. He was a thug with military training who needed cash. He was dangerous, but he was sloppy. But then I saw the bigger transfer. 2 days ago, $50,000 had been wired from our joint savings account, my life savings, to an offshore account in the Caymans. The authorization signature was digital. It was mine. I stared at the screen. I hadn't signed that. I dug deeper into the metadata. The transfer originated from an IP address I knew well. It wasn't our house. It was Julian's apartment. My brother hadn't just embezzled from the company. He had drained my personal savings to pay for my execution. I minimized the bank window and opened the cloud backup for Morgan's phone. We shared a family plan. She thought deleting texts erased them forever. She didn't know that our provider backed up everything to a cloud server that I had administrative access to. I scrolled back 3 months. The messages started innocently enough. Complaints about me working late. Complaints about me being emotionally distant. Then, they shifted. Julian, he's getting suspicious about the accounts. He asked about the lumber costs today. Morgan, he can't find out. If he does, we lose everything. Julian, he won't. We just need to accelerate the timeline. Morgan, I can't do this anymore. Sleeping next to him knowing what we're going to do. It makes me sick. Julian, just think about the island. Think about the house we looked at. Once he's gone, the life insurance plus the business liquidation, we'll have 3 million easy. We disappear. I read the words over and over. We disappear. They weren't just killing me. They were erasing me. They planned to take everything I had built, my money, my business, my life, and run away together. My wife and my brother. A sudden notification popped up on the screen. It was an alert from the GPS tracker on my truck. My truck was parked in the driveway at home, where it was supposed to be. The dot on the map was moving. I switched back to the live camera feed from the driveway. The truck was gone. I tracked the GPS signal. It was heading east on Route 9, moving fast. 75 miles per hour. Why would they take my truck? Then it hit me. They needed a body. If they couldn't find me in the woods, they needed to stage an accident. A car crash. A fire. Something to explain my disappearance without raising questions. Ryder was driving my truck. I checked the map. Route 9 led toward the quarry. A steep drop-off into deep water. It was the perfect place to dump a vehicle. I packed the tablet. My blood was boiling, but my mind was ice. I knew where Ryder was going. I knew the terrain better than he ever could. He was driving a 2-ton piece of evidence to a watery grave. But he didn't know that the truck had one more feature I hadn't told anyone about. Remote engine disable. I could kill the engine with a single command from my tablet. But I didn't want to stop him on the highway. I wanted him isolated. I watched the dot move closer to the quarry turnoff. The road there was dark, winding, and completely deserted at this hour. I descended the water tower, my boots clanging softly on the metal. I reached the bottom and sprinted toward the old service road where I had stashed a dirt bike years ago for emergencies. It was covered in a tarp, hidden under a pile of brush. I uncovered it. It was dusty, but the engine turned over on the second kick. It was loud, but speed mattered more than silence right now. I revved the engine and tore out of the lumber yard, cutting through the woods to intercept Route 9. Ryder was driving my truck. He had my scent. He had my money. But now, I was coming for him. And I wasn't just going to stop him. I was going to make him wish he had never taken that job. The wind whipped against my face, cooling the burning skin of my ear. The hunter was moving, and the prey had no idea he was driving a trap. The dirt bike roared beneath me, tearing through the underbrush like a chainsaw. I didn't use the headlight. I navigated by the moonlight filtering through the canopy and pure muscle memory. I knew these woods. I knew every route, every dip, every ravine. Ryder was stuck on the asphalt, confined to the road. I was free. I cut a diagonal path through the forest, aiming to intersect the quarry road about 2 miles before the drop-off. The timing had to be perfect. I checked the GPS on my wrist mount. The blue dot of my truck was closing in. He was doing 60 on a road designed for 30. He was anxious. He wanted to dump the truck and get out. I reached the intercept point, a sharp hairpin turn surrounded by dense oak trees. I killed the bike's engine and ditched it in the bushes. Silence returned instantly. I climbed the embankment, positioning myself on the inside curve of the turn. From my pocket, I pulled out a handful of caltrops, nasty, 4-pronged steel spikes I kept in the Pelican case. I scattered them across the asphalt in the center of the lane. Simple, medieval, effective. Then, I waited in the shadows of the tree line. 2 minutes later, headlights swept across the trees. The roar of my own V8 engine grew louder. It was a sound I usually loved. Now, it sounded like a violation. The truck came around the bend, tires squealing slightly. Ryder was pushing it. Pop his thud. The front driver's side tire hit the spikes. The blowout was instantaneous. The truck lurched violently to the left. Ryder slammed on the brakes. The heavy vehicle skidded, the rubber screaming against the pavement, and slammed into the guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal. Steam hissed from the radiator. The horn blared continuously, stuck from the impact. I didn't move. Not yet. The driver's door groaned open. Ryder fell out, coughing. He stumbled onto the road, clutching his chest. He had likely cracked a rib against the steering wheel. He was disoriented, hurt, and armed. He pulled a handgun from his waistband, a heavy .45 automatic. He swept it around wildly, aiming at the dark trees. "Who's there?" he screamed. "I know you're out there." He was panicking. Good. Panic makes people stupid. I picked up a rock and threw it hard into the brush on the opposite side of the road. Crack. Ryder spun around and fired 2 shots into the darkness. Bang. Bang. The muzzle flashes were blinding in the night. "Come out," he yelled. "I'll kill you." I moved while he was distracted. I slipped down the embankment behind him, my boots making no sound on the damp grass. I was 10 feet away. 5. He was focused on the woods across the road, breathing heavy, reloading his weapon. I stepped onto the asphalt. "Ryder," I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational. He spun around, eyes wide with shock. He tried to raise the gun. He was too slow. I stepped inside his guard, batting his gun arm aside with my left hand while driving the palm of my right hand into his chin. His head snapped back. I followed through with a sweep of his legs, sending him crashing to the pavement. Before he could scramble up, I was on him. I kicked the gun away into the darkness. I grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and slammed him against the crumpled side of my truck. "You missed," I whispered, echoing the words my wife had said on the phone. Ryder stared at me. Blood was running down his forehead from the crash. He looked at my bandaged ear, then at my eyes. He saw something there that terrified him more than the crash. "Victor, look, man, it was just a job," he stammered, holding his hands up. "Nothing personal. You came to my house," I said, tightening my grip. "You shot me in front of my wife. You stole my truck. That feels pretty personal." "She hired me," he blurted out. "Your wife? She said you were abusive. She said she needed protection." "Lie," I said. "Try again." I pulled my knife, a serrated tactical blade, and let the moonlight catch the edge. I didn't touch him with it. I just let him see it. Okay. He was shaking now. It wasn't just her. It was the other guy. The guy in the suit. "Julian," I said. "Yeah, Julian." He set it up. "He met me at the bar. He gave me the cash. He said you were going to ruin them. He said you were digging into the books, and you were going to send him to jail." So it was true. My brother was the architect. Morgan was the accomplice. And this piece of trash was the instrument. "Where are you meeting them next?" I asked. Ryder hesitated. I leaned in closer. "I can leave you here for the cops, Ryder. Or I can finish what you started. Your choice." "The motel," he screamed. "The Blue Ridge Motor Inn. Room 104. Tomorrow night at midnight. I'm supposed to give them the keys to the truck and confirm the body is gone. Then I get the rest of the money." "Midnight," I repeated. "Yes. Please, man, just let me go. I'll leave town. You'll never see me again." I looked at him. He was pathetic. A hired gun with no code. "You're right," I said. "You're leaving town." I pulled a pair of heavy-duty zip ties from my pocket. I spun him around and secured his hands behind his back, then his ankles. I dragged him to the guardrail and tied him to the post. "What are you doing?" he yelled. "You said you'd let me go." "I lied," I said. "I'm not going to kill you, Ryder. But I need you out of the way for 24 hours. I took his phone from his pocket. I unlocked it using his Face ID. "I'm going to be you for a while," I said. I walked back to the truck. The engine was dead, but the electronics still worked. I popped the trunk of the truck bed cover. Inside was a heavy tarp. I walked back to Ryder. "Don't worry," I said. "Someone will find you. Eventually." I taped his mouth shut. I took a picture of him tied to the guardrail with his own phone. Then I sent it to Morgan. No text, just the picture. Let her wonder if I did it. Let her wonder if Ryder turned on her. Let the paranoia set in. I walked into the darkness, leaving Ryder struggling against the zip ties. I had a meeting to prepare for, and I had a brother to visit. The hunt was accelerating, and now I had the element of surprise. Leaving Ryder tied to the guardrail wasn't just about neutralizing a threat. It was about planting a seed of chaos. I knew he wouldn't freeze to death. It was a mild night. But by the time the state troopers found him in the morning, he'd be desperate to talk. He'd sing to the police about Morgan and Julian just to get a plea deal. That was my backup plan. But my primary plan required something much darker. I hiked back to my dirt bike, mounted up, and rode hard toward town. I had Ryder's phone in my pocket. It buzzed against my leg every few minutes. Morgan was calling. Julian was calling. I ignored them. Silence is a weapon. Let them sweat. Let them stare at that picture of their hitman bound and gagged and wonder who took it. I needed a base of operations closer to the target. I couldn't go home, and the woods were too far from the city center. I headed to an industrial park on the south side. My construction company owned a small storage warehouse there. It was listed under an LLC that Julian didn't know about. One of the few things I had kept separate from the family business. I keyed in the code and rolled up the metal door. The space was dusty, filled with surplus drywall and bags of concrete. But in the back, there was a small office with a cot and a secure internet line. I parked the bike and sat at the desk. I pulled out Ryder's phone and finally looked at the messages. Morgan, 10:15 p.m. What the hell is that picture? Is that a joke? Morgan, 10:22 p.m. Ryder, answer me. Why are you tied up? Who sent that? Julian, 10:45 p.m. If this is a shakedown for more money, you're playing a dangerous game, pal. Call me. They were terrified. Good. I decided to reply. I needed to keep the meeting at the motel on schedule. I needed them in one place. I typed a message on Ryder's phone, mimicking his rough, illiterate style. Me, as Ryder relax. Cop patrol came by. Had to ditch phone and hide. Just got it back. That was a prank from my boys. Truck is gone. Job is done. Body is at bottom of quarry. Meeting is still on. I watched the bubbles appear instantly. They were glued to their screens. Julian, you idiot. You almost gave my sister-in-law a heart attack. Do not play games. Bring the keys. Midnight tomorrow. Room 104. I set the phone down. The trap was set. But before the meeting, I needed leverage. I needed to know exactly why Julian had turned on me. The money was part of it, sure. But hate like that takes years to build. I accessed the company surveillance feeds again. This time, I looked at the office cameras. It was 11 p.m. The office should be empty. It wasn't. Julian was there. He was in my office. I watched on the small screen as my brother frantically shredded documents. He was sweating, his tie loosened, his hair a mess. He was pulling files from my cabinet, tax returns, project bids, bank statements, and feeding them into the shredder. He was erasing the evidence of the embezzlement. I zoomed in on the camera feed. He stopped shredding and picked up a framed photo from my desk. It was a picture of the two of us fishing in Montana 5 years ago. We were smiling. I had my arm around his shoulder. He stared at the photo for a long time. I expected to see regret. I expected to see a flicker of guilt. Instead, he spat on the glass. He threw the frame into the trash can with a look of pure disgust. Always the hero, he muttered. The audio on the camera was faint, but I heard it. Saint Victor. Perfect Victor. He sat down in my chair, and put his feet up on the desk. He pulled a bottle of scotch from his briefcase. It was a bottle I had been saving for my retirement. He cracked the seal and took a swig. To the ghost, he toasted to the empty room. Rest in hell, big brother. I sat in the dusty warehouse, gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just greed. It was jealousy. A lifetime of it. He hated me because I had succeeded. He hated me because I had built the company while he played the victim. He hated me because I had Morgan. Wait, I rewound the footage. Something about the way he said Morgan in the texts earlier. My sister-in-law. I switched to the camera in the hallway. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Morgan stepped out. She wasn't wearing morning clothes. She was wearing a red dress. The kind of dress she wore when we went to expensive dinners. She walked into my office. Julian stood up. He didn't hug her like a grieving brother-in-law. He kissed her, and not a friendly kiss. It was passionate, possessive. My stomach turned. The betrayal wasn't just a double cross. It was a triangle. They had been together, probably for a long time. Is it done? She asked, pulling away. Ryder says the body is in the quarry, Julian said, pouring her a drink. We're clear. I don't like it, Morgan said, pacing. That picture, it felt wrong. He's a thug, Morgan. They have a weird sense of humor. The important thing is Victor is gone. The insurance policy pays out in 30 days. $5 million. Plus the company assets. And then we go to Rio? She asked. And then we go to Rio, he smiled. Just you and me. No more hiding. No more perfect husband looking over our shoulders. I turned off the feed. I had seen enough. I didn't need to ask why anymore. I knew. They wanted my life, my money, and each other. And I was the only thing standing in their way. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I had 21 hours until the meeting at the motel. I needed sleep. A tired operator makes mistakes. I lay down on the cot, placing the Glock on the floor next to my hand. I forced my breathing to slow. I forced my muscles to relax. I visualized the plan. Step 1. Secure the perimeter of the motel. Step 2. Disable their vehicle. Step 3. Isolate them in room 104. Step 4. The reveal. I closed my eyes. The image of Julian spitting on my photo and kissing my wife burned behind my eyelids. Sleep came, but it wasn't peaceful. It was filled with the sound of gunshots and the smell of perfume and betrayal. When I woke up, the sun was high. I did a set of push-ups to wake up my body. I checked my ear. The glue was holding. The pain was a dull throb now, manageable. I checked Ryder's phone. One new message. Ryder's mom. Happy birthday, baby boy. Love you. I stared at the screen. Even monsters have mothers. I deleted the message. I packed my gear. I checked my weapon. I put on a fresh tactical vest under my hoodie. Happy birthday, Ryder, I whispered. Tonight, you get to be the guest of honor at a funeral. But it wouldn't be his funeral. And it wouldn't be mine. It was time to go to the Blue Ridge Motor Inn. It was time to end this. The Blue Ridge Motor Inn was a stain on the edge of the highway. 2 stories of peeling paint, flickering neon, and desperate people. It was the kind of place where cash was king and questions were rude. Perfect for a payoff. Perfect for an ambush. I arrived at 10 p.m., 2 hours early. I parked the dirt bike in the woods behind the motel and approached on foot. I wore a black beanie and a face gaiter pulled down around my neck. To anyone passing by, I looked like just another drifter. Room 104 was on the ground floor, at the far end of the row, near the dumpster. Strategically, it was a good choice for them. Secluded, dark. Tactically, it was a death trap. Only one exit. I moved to the back of the building. The bathroom window of room 104 was cracked open an inch to let out the smell of stale cigarettes. I carefully slid a fiber optic camera under the sash. The room was empty. I picked the lock on the back door of the maintenance shed nearby. Inside, I found the breaker box for the entire motel. I identified the circuit for rooms 100 to 110. I didn't cut it yet. Timing is everything. I climbed the rusted fire escape to the roof of the adjacent building. From here, I had a sniper's view of the parking lot and the door to room 104. I settled into the prone position, binoculars raised. 11:45 p.m. A black luxury SUV turned into the lot. My brother's car. It looked out of place among the rusted sedans and pickup trucks. They parked right in front of room 104. The engine died. The lights went out. For a long minute, nobody moved. They were arguing. I could see the silhouettes of their hands moving. Morgan was gesturing wildly. Julian was gripping the steering wheel. Finally, the doors opened. Julian stepped out first. He was wearing a trench coat, looking nervous, his head swiveling left and right. He carried a heavy duffel bag, the rest of the money. Morgan got out of the passenger side. She wore sunglasses, even at midnight. She looked pale. They walked to the door of room 104. Julian knocked. 3 rapid taps. Ryder, he hissed. Silence. Open up. It's us. Morgan whispered loud enough for the mic on my directional receiver to pick up. I pulled out Ryder's phone. I sent a text to Julian. Me, as Ryder door is unlocked. Go in. I'm in the bathroom flushing something. Julian looked at his phone, frowned, and tried the handle. It turned. They stepped inside. I waited 5 seconds. Then, I pressed the button on my remote detonator. Not a bomb. Just a small flashbang device I had planted in the air conditioning unit of their car while they were walking to the door. Boom. The SUV's hood blew open with a blinding flash of light and a deafening concussive thud. Car alarms all over the lot started screaming. Julian and Morgan scrambled back out of the room, terrified, looking at their burning car. What the hell? Julian screamed. That was my cue. I didn't shoot. I didn't run at them. I spoke. I had wired a small Bluetooth speaker into the vent above the door of room 104 earlier. I spoke into my phone, my voice modulated to sound deeper, distorted. Going somewhere, Julian? They froze. They spun around, looking for the source of the voice. Who is that? Morgan shrieked. Ryder, is that you? Ryder is tied up at the moment, I said through the speaker. He told me everything. The money, the affair, the plan. Julian pulled a gun from his coat pocket. A shiny, silver pistol that looked like it had never been fired. He aimed it wildly at the darkness. Show yourself, he yelled, his voice cracking. I'll kill you. You already tried that, brother, I said. I dropped the voice modulation. I spoke in my own voice. Clear. Cold. Dead. Hello, Morgan. Hello, Julian. The color drained from their faces so fast it looked like they had been slapped. Morgan dropped her purse. Her hands flew to her mouth. Victor, she whispered. It was a sound of pure horror. No, you're dead. Ryder said. Ryder lied, I said. And now, you're trapped. I hit the remote for the breaker box. Zap. The lights in the entire wing of the motel died. The parking lot lights flickered and went black. They were plunged into total darkness, illuminated only by the dying flames of their car engine. Run! Julian screamed. They turned to run toward the road. But they stopped dead. Blocking the exit of the parking lot was a police cruiser. But it wasn't the police. It was a black van. The side door slid open. 3 men in tactical gear stepped out. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They were wearing unmarked gray fatigues. They held suppressed carbines. I frowned. I lowered my binoculars. I didn't call them. Who the hell were they? Julian didn't look scared of them. He looked relieved. Over here, Julian yelled, waving his arms at the armed men. Take him out. He's on the roof. He's alive. My blood turned to ice. I realized the twist too late. Julian hadn't just hired a cheap hitman like Ryder. Ryder was the decoy, the distraction. These men were the real professionals. Julian had a backup plan I hadn't seen in the books. He had hired a cleanup crew, a mercenary team. Target acquired en route. One of the men said into a radio. His voice was calm, professional. A red laser dot appeared on my chest. I rolled instantly. Flip, flip, flip. 3 rounds tore into the tar paper of the roof exactly where I had been lying. I scrambled behind an AC unit, my heart hammering. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a firefight. Victor. Julian's voice echoed up from the parking lot, triumphant now. Did you really think I'd rely on a junkie like Ryder? I knew you might survive him. That's why I brought the insurance. He laughed. A cruel, manic sound. Meet Alpha Team. They cost a hell of a lot more than Ryder, but they don't miss. I checked my mag 15 rounds. I checked my enemy. 3 highly trained operators below. And me, trapped on a roof. I smiled. A grim, bloody smile. Finally, a fair fight. Okay, Julian. I whispered, racking the slide of my Glock. Let's dance. The roof was flat, gravel-covered, and offered almost no cover except for 2 rusted AC units and a chimney stack. I was pinned. The laser sights of the Alpha Team were sweeping the edge, waiting for me to pop my head up. Suppressing fire, a voice shouted from below. The air above me filled with the snap and hiss of high-velocity rounds. Chunks of brick and metal sprayed over me. They were keeping my head down while one of them flanked. It was textbook infantry tactics. I couldn't stay here. If they surrounded the building, I was dead. I looked at the fire escape I had climbed. It was a kill zone now. If I touched that ladder, they'd cut me in half. I crawled on my belly toward the far side of the roof, away from the parking lot. There was a 10-foot gap between this motel building and the adjacent diner. It was a suicide jump in full gear, in the dark, under fire. I had no choice. I took a breath. 1, 2. I sprinted. Target moving. Bullets chewed up the gravel at my heels. I hit the edge of the roof and launched myself into the void. For a second, I was weightless. The wind roared in my ears. Then, my chest slammed into the edge of the diner's roof. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My ribs screamed. My fingers scrambled for purchase on the wet, slippery rubber membrane of the roof. I started to slip backward. I gritted my teeth and dug my boots into the siding, hauling myself up with a grunt of exertion. I rolled onto the flat surface of the diner roof just as rounds began to pepper the wall below me. I was alive, but I was running out of real estate. I needed to separate them. 3 operators working as a unit were unstoppable. 3 individuals hunting in the dark were vulnerable. I needed to create a kill box. I scanned the diner roof. There was a heavy metal access hatch. I pulled it open. It led down into the kitchen. I dropped down, landing on a stainless steel prep table. The kitchen smelled of grease and old coffee. I moved quickly. I turned on all the gas burners on the massive industrial stove. I didn't light them. I just let the gas hiss out. Then I grabbed a bottle of cooking oil and slicked the floor in front of the back door. I moved into the dining area. It was dark, filled with shadows and booths. I overturned a table to create cover near the front entrance. I waited. Outside, I heard the boots crunching on gravel. They were sweeping the perimeter. He went into the diner. A voice said over a radio, "Breaching rear." Perfect. The back door kicked open. 2 beams of tactical light sliced through the darkness. The first man stepped in. His boot hit the oil. He went down hard, his weapon clattering against the tile. "Contact," he yelled. I fired. 1 shot. I didn't aim for the man. I aimed for the pilot light on the wall-mounted heater above the stove. Whoosh. The gas-filled kitchen ignited in a sudden, violent fireball. It wasn't an explosion that leveled the building, but a flashover that sucked the oxygen out of the room and created a wall of flame. The 2 men in the kitchen screamed, retreating out the back door, batting at the flames on their tactical vests. They were out of the fight for at least a few minutes. That left one, the leader, the one who had stayed outside with Julian and Morgan. I kicked open the front door of the diner and sprinted into the parking lot smoke. The fire alarm was blaring now. Chaos was my ally. I saw them. Julian and Morgan were cowering behind the mercenaries' van. The leader of Alpha Team stood in front of them, scanning the burning diner, confused. "Flank right. Flank right," he was yelling into his comms. He didn't see me coming from his left. I moved through the smoke like a wraith. I didn't shoot him. He was wearing body armor. A pistol round might not stop him. I tackled him. We hit the asphalt hard. He was strong, trained. He tried to bring his rifle barrel around to my chest. I jammed my thumb into the pressure point in his neck and drove my knee into his groin. He grunted, his grip loosening. I ripped the rifle from his hands and tossed it away. I drew my knife. He drew his. We circled each other in the flickering orange light of the burning diner. "You're good," he rasped. "But you're old." He lunged. A fast, efficient thrust aimed at my liver. I sidestepped, catching his wrist. I used his own momentum against him, twisting his arm behind his back until I heard the snap of the radius bone. He shouted, dropping to 1 knee. I kicked him in the temple. He collapsed, unconscious. Silence returned, save for the crackling of the fire. I stood up, breathing hard, blood dripping from my nose. I turned to look at the van. Julian and Morgan were gone. They had used the chaos to run, but they couldn't have gone far. Their car was destroyed. The van was locked. They were on foot, heading into the woods. I walked over to the unconscious mercenary leader. I reached into his vest and pulled out his radio. Alpha 1, report. A voice crackled from the device. It was one of the burned men from the kitchen. I keyed the mic. Alpha 1 is offline, I said. This contract is terminated. Leave now, or you burn with the building. Silence. Then, the sound of a vehicle engine starting behind the diner. They were cutting their losses. Mercenaries don't die for a failed paycheck. I was alone again. I looked at the dark tree lane where my wife and brother had vanished. I checked my ammo. I wiped the blood from my eyes. Run, I whispered. Run as fast as you can. I started walking toward the trees. The quiet revenge I had planned was over. This was primal now. I wasn't hunting them to arrest them anymore. I was hunting them to break them. I pulled out the thermal scope I had taken from the mercenaries' gear bag. I scanned the woods. 2 heat signatures, glowing white against the cool gray of the forest. They were moving slow, stumbling. I didn't run. I walked, because I knew where they were going. There was only one structure in these woods for 5 miles. An old hunting cabin my father had built. Julian knew it. He thought it was safety. He was wrong. It was the final trap. The woods were different at night when you were the one being hunted. I knew that feeling well. Now, Morgan and Julian were learning it. I tracked them easily. They were making enough noise to wake the dead, cracking branches, stumbling over roots, arguing in hushed, panicked whispers. They had no flashlights. They had no gear, just fear and the clothes on their backs. I stayed 50 yards behind them, moving parallel to their path. I used the thermal monocular to keep tabs on them. I saw Julian stop. He leaned against a tree, bent over, retching. The stress was getting to him. The corporate shark was finding out that nature doesn't care about your bank account. Morgan was pulling at his arm. I could see the heat signature of her hand gripping his coat. She was dragging him forward. She was the stronger one now. Desperation does that to people. I decided to turn the screws. I had Ryder's phone still. I had cloned Julian's number earlier in the day when I accessed the company's server. I could send messages that appeared to come from his phone to her phone, and vice versa. I waited until they started moving again. I sent a text to Morgan's Apple Watch, which I knew she was wearing. From Julian. If he catches us, I'm telling him it was your idea. I'm not dying for you. I watched through the thermal scope. Morgan stopped dead. She looked at her wrist. She looked at Julian, who was walking a few feet ahead of her. She didn't say anything, but the gap between them grew. She slowed down. She didn't trust him anymore. 10 minutes later, I sent a message to Julian's phone. From Morgan, you are weak. If you can't protect me, I don't need you. I should have hired someone better. Julian stopped. He spun around and looked at Morgan. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. He was shouting. He was waving his arms. She was shouting back. The alliance was fracturing. I moved closer. I wanted them to hear me now. I snapped a large branch under my boot. Crack. They both froze. They huddled together, staring into the darkness. Did you hear that? Morgan whimpered. Her voice drifted through the trees. It's just an animal, Julian said, but his voice was shaking. Keep moving. The cabin is close. There's a rifle there. Dad always kept a rifle under the floorboards. I smiled in the dark. Dad always kept a rifle. Yes, he did. And I had removed the firing pin 3 years ago when I winterized the place. I let them run. I let them exhaust themselves. They reached the cabin clearing an hour later. It was a small, rotting structure of logs and tin. To them, it looked like a fortress. To me, it looked like a cage. They burst through the door and slammed it shut. I heard the heavy wooden bar drop into place. I moved to the edge of the clearing. I didn't go in. Not yet. I circled the cabin. I found the external fuse box. I cut the power. A scream from inside. Morgan. He's here. He cut the lights. Shut up. Julian yelled. Help me find the gun. I heard the frantic scraping of furniture, the sound of floorboards being pried up. I found it. Julian yelled. I got it. Come and get me, Victor. I'm armed. I leaned against a tree, resting. I took a sip of water from my camelback. I checked my watch. 3 a.m. I took out a small, high-powered laser pointer. I aimed it through the dirty window of the cabin. The red dot danced on the far wall. What is that? Morgan screamed. Laser. Get down. They hit the floor. I moved the dot around the room. I played with them like cats. Every time the dot touched them, they scrambled away, terrified a bullet would follow. I know you're in there, I shouted. My voice boomed in the silent clearing. I know about the money. I know about the affair. I know about the baby. Silence. That last part was a guess. A hunch based on the way Morgan had been protecting her stomach when they ran. The way she hadn't touched alcohol at the party last week. How? Morgan's voice was barely a whisper, but in the quiet woods, it carried. You're pregnant, Julian asked. Morgan, you didn't tell me. It might not be yours, she stammered. What? Julian roared. You said you hated him. You said you hadn't slept with him in months. I had to keep up appearances, she screamed back. He was getting suspicious. You slept with him? Julian sounded like he was going to vomit. While we were planning to kill him. Stop it, I yelled from the darkness. Stop fighting. Save your energy for the confession. I walked up to the front door. I didn't try to open it. I just stood there. There is no way out, I said calmly. The road is blocked. The police are on their way, but they are 30 minutes out. That leaves us 30 minutes alone. I have a gun, Julian shouted. I heard the metallic click of the trigger. Click, click. You have a paperweight, I said. Check the firing pin, Julian. I heard the sound of the rifle being thrown against the wall. Please, Morgan sobbed. Victor, please. We can make a deal. The money, you can have it all. Just let us go. I don't want the money, I said. I want the truth. Why, Julian? Why did you do it? Because you were always the favorite. Julian screamed through the door. Dad loved you. The company loved you. You were the war hero. I was just the accountant. I was the shadow. I wanted what was yours, Victor. Just once, I wanted to win. And you, Morgan? I asked. I was bored, she cried. You were always gone. Even when you were home, you were distant. You were a ghost. Julian, he made me feel alive. He made me feel dangerous. Dangerous, I repeated. You wanted dangerous. I pulled a flare from my vest. I cracked it. The clearing bathed in harsh red light. Well, I said, kicking the door hard. The wood splintered. You got it. I stepped back. Come out, I commanded, or I burn it down. The door creaked open slowly. They stepped out into the red light. Hands up, trembling, broken. But as I looked at them, my brother, my wife, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I didn't feel the rush of victory. I just felt tired. And then, I saw Julian's hand move. Not to his head, not to surrender. He was reaching into his boot. He had a backup weapon, a small ankle revolver. He wasn't broken. He was cornered. And a cornered rat bites. Die, he screamed, dropping to one knee and raising the gun. The muzzle flash in the red light of the flare was blinding. Bang! A bullet tore through the sleeve of my hoodie, grazing my bicep. It burned like a hornet's sting. I didn't flinch. I didn't dive. I reacted with the cold, mechanical precision that had been drilled into me for 15 years. I stepped forward, closing the distance before he could cock the hammer for a second shot. I kicked the revolver out of his hand. It spun into the darkness. Then I kicked him in the chest. Julian flew backward, slamming into the log wall of the cabin. He slid down, gasping for air, clutching his ribs. Morgan screamed and tried to run past me into the woods. I didn't chase her. I didn't have to. I reached out and grabbed the back of her coat collar. I swung her around, not violently, but with enough force to stop her momentum. She stumbled and fell into the dirt next to Julian. Stay, I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the voice of a man who held absolute control over the environment. I picked up the flare and stuck it into the ground between us. It hissed and sputtered, casting long, dancing shadows on the trees. You missed again, Julian, I said, looking down at my brother. He looked up at me, wheezing. There was blood on his teeth. The arrogance was gone. The corporate mask was shattered. All that was left was a frightened child. Just do it, he choked out. Kill us. That's what you do, right? You're a killer. Prove us right. Is that what you think? I asked. I crouched down so I was eye level with them. You think I'm the monster here? You hunted us like animals. Morgan sobbed, hugging her knees. You terrified us. I terrified you. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You hired a man to put a bullet in my brain while I fixed our deck. You watched me bleed. You planned to erase me. I pulled out my phone. I hit record. Talk, I said. Start from the beginning. The embezzlement. Ryder. The mercenaries. Everything. Go to hell. Julian spat. I stood up and walked over to the tree line. I picked up a heavy jerry can I had stashed there earlier. It wasn't gas. It was water. But they didn't know that. I splashed the liquid over the dry leaves around them. I splashed it on the cabin wall. I said talk. I repeated, holding the flare closer to the wet ground. Okay. Morgan shrieked. I'll tell you. It started a year ago. Julian said the company was going under because of your safe investments. He started moving money to offshore accounts to save himself. Then we started talking about how much easier it would be if you weren't there to check the books. And the baby? I asked. It's Julian's, she whispered, looking at the ground. We haven't been together in months, Victor. You know that. I looked at Julian. And the mercenaries? Blackwood Tactical, Julian muttered, defeated. I paid them a retainer 6 months ago, just in case. They were supposed to clean up if Ryder failed. I liquidated the pension fund to pay them. The employee pension fund? I asked. My anger flared hotter than the magnesium torch in my hand. You stole from the men and women who built our company? Families? Kids? I needed the money. Julian yelled. I was going to pay it back once the insurance check cleared. You are pathetic, I said. I tossed the jerrycan aside. I stomped out the flare. The clearing plunged back into darkness, lit only by the faint moonlight. Get up, I ordered. Where are we going? Morgan asked, trembling. We aren't going anywhere, I said. You're going to sit right there until the police arrive. You called them? Julian asked, confused. You aren't going to kill us? I looked at my brother. I looked at the man I had protected from bullies when we were kids. The man I had shared a bunk bed with. Killing you is easy, Julian, I said softly. I've killed men for less. But killing you, that sets you free. That makes you a victim. A tragedy. I leaned in close. I want you to live. I want you to sit in a cell for 20 years knowing that you had everything, and you threw it away because you were jealous. I want you to think about this moment every single day. I pulled a pair of heavy zip ties from my vest. Hands, I said. They didn't fight. They were broken. I secured Julian's hands behind his back, then Morgan's. I sat them down on the porch of the cabin. Victor, Morgan whispered. I'm sorry. I loved you once. I really did. I looked at her. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. She looked like a stranger. No, you didn't, I said. You loved the idea of me. You loved the safety. But you never knew me. I walked to the edge of the clearing and sat on a stump, my back to them, my gun on my lap. Don't speak, I said. Just wait. We sat in silence for 20 minutes. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion in my bones. My ear throbbed. My arm burned. My heart felt hollowed out. Then, in the distance, I saw the blue lights flashing through the trees. The wail of sirens cut through the night air. The cavalry had arrived, but they weren't here to save me. I had saved myself. They were here to clean up the mess. I stood up and put my hands on my head as the first officers burst into the clearing, weapons drawn. Drop the weapon, they screamed. Get on the ground. I knelt slowly, placing my Glock on the dirt. It's over, I said to myself. But as I looked at Julian and Morgan being hauled up by the officers, I knew it wasn't really over. The legal battle was just starting. The scandal, the news. But Victor the husband was dead. And Victor the specialist, he was just getting started on his new life. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and smelled of cheap coffee and disinfectant. It was a familiar environment for me, but usually I was the one on the other side of the glass. I sat at the metal table, my lawyer, an old contact named Grant who specialized in difficult military cases, sitting beside me. My ear was freshly bandaged, stitched up by a paramedic who looked at me like I was a ghost. My arm was wrapped. Detective Miller sat across from us. He looked tired. He had a stack of files in front of him that was 3 inches thick. "Let me get this straight, Mr. Vance," Miller said, rubbing his temples. "Your wife hired a hitman. He missed. You faked your death. You tracked them down. You disabled a team of mercenaries at a motel. And then you held your wife and brother captive in the woods until we arrived." "That sums it up," I said calmly. "And the mercenaries? The ones at the motel?" "Gone," I said. "They don't stick around for police reports. But you'll find their van burned out a few miles south if you look hard enough." Miller sighed. "We found the hitman. Ryder Kane. Tied to a guardrail. He's singing like a canary. We have the text messages. We have the bank transfers. We have the confession you recorded in the woods." He leaned forward. "You know you could be charged with vigilantism, assault, kidnapping." "Self-defense," Grant interjected smoothly. "My client was under active threat of assassination. He neutralized the threats with non-lethal force and detained them for law enforcement. He is a decorated veteran protecting his life." Miller looked at me for a long moment. Then he closed the file. "The DA isn't going to touch you," Miller said quietly. "Not with what we found in your brother's financials. He stole millions, Victor. From the company, from the pension fund. The feds are already involved. This is big. Can I see them?" I asked. "Who?" "Morgan and Julian. Before they are processed." Miller hesitated. "That's highly irregular." "I need closure," I said. 5 minutes. Then I walk away." Miller nodded slowly. 5 minutes. Through the glass. No contact. I walked down the hallway. The 2 holding cells were adjacent. I went to Julian's first. He was sitting on the cot, his head in his hands. He looked small. The expensive suit was ruined, torn, and muddy. He looked up when I approached the window. His eyes were hollow. "They're seizing everything," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. "The house, the cars, the accounts. It's all gone, Victor." "It was never yours," I said. "I just wanted to be you," he whispered. "I just wanted people to look at me the way they look at you. With respect." "Respect isn't bought, Julian," I said, placing my hand on the glass. "It's earned. And you just earned a lifetime of looking over your shoulder in a federal prison." He started to cry. Ugly, sobbing tears. I felt nothing. The brother I loved died the moment he signed that check to Ryder. I walked to the next cell. Morgan. She was standing at the bars, gripping them with white knuckles. She had cleaned her face, tried to fix her hair. She was trying to manipulate me one last time. "Victor," she said softly. "Please. You can fix this. You have connections. Tell them I was coerced. Tell them Julian forced me. Please, think of the baby." I looked at her stomach. "I am thinking of the baby," I said. "That child will be born in prison. It will go into the system. And maybe, just maybe, it will have a chance to grow up without your poison in its veins." "I'm your wife," she screamed, dropping the act. "You promised to protect me." "I promised to protect my wife," I said, cold as ice. "But you aren't my wife. You're just a stranger who tried to kill me." I turned to walk away. "Victor," she shrieked. "You can't leave me here. I can't do this. I'm scared." I stopped. I didn't turn around. "You should be," I said. I walked out of the precinct into the morning sun. It was blindingly bright. The air was fresh. Grant was waiting by his car. "It's done?" he asked. "The criminal part is done," I said. "Now the cleanup begins." "I started the paperwork," Grant said, handing me a folder. "Liquidation of the company assets to repay the pension fund. Divorce filings. Restraining orders. The sale of the house." "Good," I said. "What will you do, Victor?" Grant asked. "You can't go back to construction. Your face is going to be on the news." I looked at the city skyline. I looked at the scar on my arm. I felt the phantom itch of the bullet wound on my ear. "No," I said. "I can't go back. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 48 hours, my pulse was normal. I have a specific set of skills, Grant. I tried to bury them. I tried to pretend they didn't exist. But they saved my life. So, I said, opening the car door. I think it's time I put them to use again. There are other people out there like me. People who have been betrayed. People who need help when the law isn't enough. Grant smiled. You're going back into the shadows. Not the shadows, I said, putting on my sunglasses. The light. I'm going to burn the shadows away. I stood on the back deck for the last time. The wood where the bullet had struck was still splintered, a jagged scar in the cedar plank. I hadn't fixed it. I left it there for the new owners. Maybe they would sand it down. Maybe they would replace the board. Or maybe they would wonder what kind of force it took to gouge a hole that deep. The house was empty. The furniture was gone, auctioned off. The echoes of my life with Morgan, the laughter in the kitchen, the arguments in the hallway, the silence of the secrets, were all fading. I walked through the rooms one by one. I felt like a stranger in my own history. Grant had handled everything with surgical precision. The business was liquidated. Every cent of the proceeds went back to the employee pension fund that Julian had raided. I walked away with nothing but my truck, my gear, and my freedom. I was broke, technically, but I had never felt richer. The news had broken 2 days ago. The headlines were sensational. Suburban assassination plot foiled. Brother versus brother. The Black Ops contractor who wouldn't die. I didn't read them. I didn't care about the fame. I cared about the verdict. Grant had called me this morning. The plea deals were signed. Julian was looking at 25 years. Federal charges for embezzlement, state charges for conspiracy to commit murder. He would be an old man when he saw the sky again. Morgan got 15 years. She had turned state's evidence against Julian to save herself. But the judge, a hard-nosed woman who didn't like betrayal, didn't let her off the hook. She would give birth in a prison ward. The state would take the child. Grant had already arranged for a distant cousin of mine, a good woman in Ohio, to adopt the baby. That child would grow up loved and far away from the poison of its parents. Ryder took a deal for 10 years in exchange for testifying against the mercenary team. He was safer in prison than he was on the street, anyway. I walked out the front door and locked it. I dropped the keys in the mailbox. My new ride was waiting in the driveway. A nondescript gray SUV. No GPS tracker. No fancy rims. Just a reliable engine and a full tank of gas. I climbed in and threw my duffel bag on the passenger seat. I looked at the house one last time. I touched the scar on my ear. It was a part of me now. A reminder that the people closest to you are the only ones who can really hurt you. Strangers can only kill your body. Family can kill your soul. But my soul wasn't dead. It was just calloused. I started the engine. I didn't look back as I pulled onto the main road. I headed west, toward the setting sun. I wasn't Victor the contractor anymore. I wasn't Victor the husband. I was something else. A wanderer. A fixer. There were other people out there. People like me who had been used, discarded, and betrayed. People who couldn't go to the police. People who needed a ghost to haunt their monsters. I merged onto the highway. The road stretched out endlessly before me. The betrayal had burned my life to the ground. But in the ashes, I found the man I was always meant to be. I turned on the radio. Classic rock. The wind rushed through the open window. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't watching the shadows. I was the shadow. And I was finally free. And that is the end of Victor's journey, but the beginning of his new life.